Our last speaker is Jiske Hollander, who has introduced herself during our last round of discussion. I think not all of the people who are still in the building are here, but I would still like to ask you to begin with your speech, because I think they are coming soon into this audience.
Okay, no problem. It's always a pleasure to be the last speaker of the day, of course. You can always see these faces having this look of, well, when does the herding stop today? So that makes that I feel obliged to end today with a rather short and simple message, and I try to bring it as energetic to you as possible in the hope to get some new fire into the discussion. I think the Telder Stichting did actually a great job in the lineup of this afternoon, because me speaking after Christina, I think has the advantage of, whereas Christina took a rather academic approach in dealing with how ideology is of help and how liberalism is of help in this discussion about competences, I will try to fill in the way I see liberalism then actually can guide us in the discussion today. And of course, I also see that a bit as my task, working for a think tank that is affiliated to the Social Liberal Party in the Netherlands. My contribution, I've called it Everything Flows and Nothing Abides, or how the political discussion on subsidiarity in the EU obscures our view on what really matters. I thought to fire the discussion up, I need to choose an edgy title for my contribution. And I think the starting point of my contribution today is rather straightforward. The political debate on the division of competences in the EU, I claim, hides more than it clarifies. The discussion about this division of competences often immediately focuses on policy questions, especially in the domain of politics and parliaments, without addressing the underlying matter that is fundamentally at stake. My point today is, and I wrote that also in the outline that I sent to you, that among liberals, the question of subsidiarity, or an ideal division of competences in an EU context, should in first instance not be discussed on the superficial level of whether Europe should or should not have a say in the shape of cucumbers or the regulations of light bulbs, because, this is what I claim, nothing liberally distinctive nor anything sensible for the long run can be said about this matter on this level. Sticking to discussing this matter on this superficial level, we might, at best, end up with a division of nitty-gritty competences custom-made for today and worthless for tomorrow, while, and that is the dangerous thing, I think, in the meantime, we run the risk of being overtaken by reality, in which national sovereignty on pensions, for instance, to choose one topic only, silently turns into a fiction because changing realities and the way our international financial systems have gotten interwoven. So, this superficial approach of subsidiarity and the discussion is, as I would claim, a rather penny-wise, pound-foolish way at best, so to speak. Therefore, I claim, and I totally agree with Christina here, that we need to take a step back and we have to start with the basics, so that we can do justice to the truly fundamental questions behind the political desire of recent years to come up with a detailed list of competences in an EU context. So that is actually what I would like to do with you today, sharing with you some thoughts on how, in my view, we should take this step back. Doing justice to the fundamental matters at stake means starting with the following questions. How did the political discussion about subsidiarity develop in recent years, and what does that reveal with regard to the concerns to which subsidiarity is supposed to be the answer? And how should liberal politicians position themselves in doing justice to these concerns? By actively propagating a carved-in-stone division of competences list in Parliament, or should we seek for a remedy in a different direction? Well, I can be quite short on talking with you, because you are an expert on this, on how the discussion of subsidiarity developed. Of course, we all know subsidiarity has been used for decades as a measure to, or an instrument in the debate on European integration to counteract centralizing tendencies in the integration process. Ralph Dahrendorf brought it up already in 1971, and Delors and Lubbers have talked about it in the 1980s. it became rather popular in the debate on the Maastricht Treaty. And interesting, I think it is, that it was used then by the pro-camp to contain or to soothe the worries of the loss of control. And it was in the early 90s officially adopted into the treaty, and it gained an ever more prominent position than within the debate on European integration in the years that followed. With a failed constitution and the Lisbon Treaty that we now have, it has become mainstream in the public debate. And now, interestingly enough, we have said it already, the term is much more associated with Euroscepticism in answer to meddlesomeness from Brussels. In this context, and we discussed about it, I think the discussion that Cameron started in the UK was, well, the basing starting point for this discussion here today, but I have also closely followed the debate as it was picked up on by the Dutch Christian Democrats in February 2013, when Van Haarsma-Buma called for claiming back power from Brussels and proposed a list of EU measures and directives that should be abandoned because they concern tasks that, well, according to the rules of subsidiarity in his eyes, better befitted the national level of decision making. This call of Van Haarsma-Buma actually led to this 54 point list of the Dutch government. And I think, looking back on that discussion in the Netherlands of last year, what stood out was that the measures and directives mentioned on both Buma's list and those that were on the eventual list that the Dutch government presented were in general, I think, and especially by a lot of media in the Netherlands, skeptically received. The things listed were by and large considered mostly as nitty-gritty. We have had attention here for the school fruit and school milk, these kind of things that were on the list. And especially they were nitty-gritty when regarded in the context of the enormous new financial and economic responsibilities that the EU was given, well, with consent of the nation state around the same time. These things happened more or less parallel. For that reason, the question has come up, and I think this question is absolutely justified. What is the value of the calls for a strictly defined competence list in a time that shows us more than ever that what the EU should or should not do is a matter of perspective that develops over time, depending on the circumstances and the challenges at hand? Meanwhile, of course, I don't want to be too relativistic. I also see that there is a reason that the desire and call for a clear division of competences is now at the heart of the political debate and gathers both public and political support. For one reason or the other, the discomfort with what the EU does or does not do has run sky high, and I think that's a clear sign that something is wrong, something that should be addressed in order to be able to move forward with the European integration in from a liberal perspective, productive way. But what is then exactly wrong, and how should we address it? The point of my contribution here today is that we need to address the question behind the question. That requires, in the first place, investigating what lies underneath the subsidiarity debate. And this is something that the Van Mierlo Foundation, the foundation for which I work, has at least tried to make a start with in our essay on European integration. It is this booklet. It's in Dutch, unfortunately, so but for those of you that can read Dutch and who are interested. It was published last spring in the running up to the European elections. And in this booklet, we asked ourselves, what is at the core of the complaints of Brussels governing by decree that often tend to lead to a call for a sharply defined list of competences? As the underlying motivation for invoking subsidiarity in the way men like Cameron and Van Haarsma-Buma in the Netherlands have done, we identified the desire for compensating for the loss of grip, of the perceived loss of grip because of the EU, of individuals on their personal lives. And if we look at the current subsidiarity debate from this angle, it leaves us with an important observation, I think. Apparently, people feel loss of grip and influence on their lives, which they blame on the EU. And it's an observation that brings us to two questions. Is this a concern that liberals and liberal politicians in particular should take seriously in the first place? And if so, Is subsidiarity, as in understood as in creating a strict or a permanent division of competence, the answer to this concern? With regard to the first question, is this a concern that liberal politicians should take seriously? Yes, I think definitely so. The essence of liberal politics is, in my view, to strive for the freedom of man, the freedom to shape and control one's life and the context in which it takes place as much as possible. Having a close look at Euroscepticism and what is actually at the heart of this skepticism, we see that precisely this ability of man and woman to shape their own lives seems considered to be threatened by the EU. We all know the complaints. Europe, or even worse, Brussels, takes power away from us, money that should be spent on the public good. For liberals, that means investment in policies that serves individual liberty, is said to be spoiled on enormous bureaucracies, more generally on things we have no say in, and so it leads to a perception of the EU decisions as falling down upon, of coming down on us from heaven without a clear reason, and we just have to obey Brussels. Well, regardless of the normative conclusions or whether we agree with these complaints in the first place or not, it is a matter that liberals should take seriously. From a liberal point of view, yielding power of decision making to a state authority is only defendable in case it is considered to contribute to the freedom of individuals to shape their lives. Within the liberal family, of course, we can dispute for hours and hours and weeks on how and to what extent governmental authorities are able or should contribute to individual liberty. It's a debate on positive and negative freedoms and how governments relate to that. I will leave that aside from now, but I think we can agree on this, that we should, and I think the man in that corner, who's looking to his left right now, said it this morning, that we should, sorry, I forgot your name. That we always should, as a benchmark, should take the way governments contribute to individual freedoms and of individual liberty. And since it is exactly this freedom that is claimed to be at stake in the debate on European integration of today, we should explore this matter carefully. That's a thing that I know for sure. And so much for the first question. Coming to the second question then, is subsidiarity the answer to this concern? Well, I think that the core question is, how does decision-making on various levels, in a liberal view, serves facilitating individual freedom of individual liberty? And it is necessary or even desirable to come up with a, and is it necessary, sorry, or even desirable to come up with a carved-in-stone division of competences in order to protect this value of facilitating individual freedom in an EU context? In other words, is subsidiarity, as it is interpreted or as it comes up in the current political debate, the answer to this concern of losing grip that people have? In order to answer these questions, we again need to take a step back and go further back to basics. Because why did liberals support European integration in the first place? Wherein lies the value to liberals of the concept of European integration to begin with? In the 19th century, liberals turned to constructing the modern state in order to free the individual from the restrictive feudal ties, and I think that the nation-state redeemed its promises in this regard. By means of constitution, establishing the rule of law, by creating basic arrangements for social securities, etc., etc., the nation-state freed individuals to a large extent from private interdependencies. However, over time, but private interdependencies only as far as they are concerned, restrictive for individual freedom, of course. However, over time, new and unforeseen challenges came up, and globalization, I think, is one of the core things in this to mention in this regard. And it turned out that the framework of the nation-state could not, in and by itself, guarantee the freedom of men. Well, here the concept, we all know it, of shaping a transnational governmental framework that enhanced or protected liberal liberties came up as a sensible idea. After 1945, the notion that communal problems influencing the freedom of the liberties of men should be addressed in close European cooperation fell on fertile grounds, especially in the Netherlands. It is shown, for instance, and I think it's a nice illustration, that it did not only fell on fertile grounds because of the economic freedoms or the economic chances that were seen, as is shown by the following quote of the liberal politician Gijsbertus Vonk in the debate on the Treaty of Brussels. So it was in a very, very early stage of discussing ways to come up with European cooperation. And he spoke of the Western European Union as a desirable and necessary first step towards the development of and this is, I think, rather interesting, socially and economically joint power that could set bounds to the communist aim. In his enthusiasm for the treaty, Frank referred to the credo of the Dutch Union of Utrecht even, and he said, "United we will stand." Well, ever since the start of the European integration, among liberals, the basic attitude towards governance has been, and I think rightly so, an instrumental one. No governmental level is to pervert a priori. The level to be chosen is the level that, depending on the challenge, serves the protection of the guaranteeing of the liberal freedoms best. Well, as there are good reasons from a liberal perspective to deal with certain issues on a national or even a local level, there are also benefits to doing things together on a European level. The EU level of policy and decision making is more effective, I think that we all can agree on this, when trying to tackle transnational issues that impact on the individual freedoms of citizens. Or, as it has also been aptly put, the EU is better equipped to internalize the externalities of transnational issues such as crime, international crime, pollution, etc. Therefore, as I see it going up, with this I mean decision making, deciding to make decisions or to make policy on a European level is needed in certain policy fields. The same holds true, by the way, for going down, for decentralizing to a local level. And I think it's important to note that when I speak of an effective way of guaranteeing personal liberties, I do not mean it necessarily as a technocratic argument, but a liberal democratic argument in essence. When the networks within which our economic, social and environmental activities take place increasingly stretch beyond national borders, but the political institutions able and mandated to shape and set limits to these networks remain on a lower level, democratic control is weakened. Liberals should fight this weakening of democratic control, I think, because it runs counter to their main aim, the freedom from every man and woman to shape his or her life in accordance with personal preferences. It touches upon that core instrument that we need as liberals to guarantee our individual freedoms. But here comes the but, of course. Regarded from the perspective of contributing to individual freedom, what problem should be addressed on what governmental level is never a black and white matter, nor something that can be discussed apart from time, place, and historic circumstances. As history has shown us, most often various levels of government need to work together in order to guarantee the best result for citizens, and not seldom tasks shifted back and forth throughout time. The already infamous operatie decentralisatie that is rapidly approaching the Netherlands now, it will be executed from January 2015 onwards, is illustrative in this regard. Therefore, is my conclusion, it's not possible nor desirable to pretend that we can come up with an effective list without any historical horizon that states what level of government can protect the interests of our citizens. This is in essence a political discussion that needs to go on continuously on all levels of politics. And this brings me actually to the core of what I argue today. The subsidiarity debate as it takes place, and then not necessarily the full scope of it as academics see it, but as it takes place in the political domain, focuses mostly on what should be done where, instead of how we decide on what is done by whom, whereas the latter question is the more important one for liberals, I think. Democratic and the transparent decision-making process, or democratic and transparent decision-making processes are needed, in which the division of competences is an ongoing topic of debate, and in which all levels can have their say, and the voice of minorities is heard at all times. And it is exactly with regard to this point, and then we return to the institutional aspects that I think also beautifully came up in the contribution of Dirk-Jan Epping today. It is with regard to this point that the EU currently falls short most clearly. And I think that it is this point that we should focus our political attention on if we really want to make something of our liberal ambitions for Europe. Summarizing my point here, yes, there are most certainly public concerns with regard to European integration and the division of competences that we should take most seriously, especially when they touch upon the core liberal ambitions, such as paving the way for personal freedom. But we also need to stay critical of the answers that are suggested. The call for a clear division of competences in the EU, as it is uttered by men like Cameron and closer to home Van Haarsma-Buma, is not an effective nor a desired instrument in bringing closer a liberal Europe that serves the personal liberties. The competence question does not need to be definitely resolved. The struggle between national and supranational power is inherent, in my view, to the nature of the European Union, and, more importantly, it is part of its checks and balances system. Definite lists do not allow us to respond to new issues and do not do what is needed to protect individual freedom under changing circumstances. To put it even stronger, I think such lists, they deflect attention from the more fundamental questions and open the door for harmonization through less transparent means, whereas the one thing that Europe needs in order to bring a liberal Europe closer is making work of European democracy and transparent ways of decision making. So what to focus on instead? That's the last question that I want to address here. As I say, that the solution is not to be sought in rigid division of competences, but rather in an open contestation of this division. We need to rethink the institutional framework of the European Union and how it can facilitate such an open contestation of division, and can set the core conditions of such a system, which means, I think, we need an equal role for, and I spoke of this morning in my question, an equal role for people as citizens of the EU and citizens of the nation state. They have to, they need to be able to bring their interests to the fore in these different roles. And then I think we need to talk about suggestions such as a Senate or a role of national parliaments, at least in the EU institutional context. And secondly, and this is also a very important topic, we need to focus on accountability. We need to set in place the functioning mechanisms for popular control that are perceived as, or we need to set in place functioning mechanisms for popular control that are perceived as legitimate. And this is what is lacking currently in the EU, I think. And for now, I will leave it at that.
Thank you, Jiske. Any questions or remarks, comments? Yeah, Ton van den Brink.
Taking the floor, trying to make up for my absence this morning. Yeah, I hope. A very quick question. So you focus on not having a definite list to set things in stone, but rather a political dialogue. If I'm transfer it into my own words. And in that light, I was wondering what you think of, in fact, the British balance of competences review. How is that evaluated by you? Because to me, I find it very interesting, perhaps indeed much more interesting than the Dutch exercise, because of all the input that is gathered in this process. But the outcome so far is, well, doesn't necessarily lead to a certain division of competences. It's an exploration of all policy areas of the European Union, and some things are considered good, others perhaps the Union could have given a bit more freedom to the member states. So what does it lead to? It's very difficult to see what the link to the referendum actually will be. Will it be a renegotiating of the treaty? Will it be renegotiating concrete legislation? Will it be coming to an even more special position for the UK? I cannot deduct that from the balance of competence review as we have it right now. So in that sense it would fit your idea quite perfectly, namely that it brings all kinds of input together for a political dialogue on these issues. That's very interesting. And then the next step, perhaps, if I understand you correctly, is to connect these dialogues, because it's the Dutch subsidiarity exercise is an internal exercise. The UK, well, it has input from other member states as well, if I'm correct, but still a rather nationally focused exercise. So how to bring all this together into a meaningful dialogue on what should be a good balance of powers.
And the crucial thing in that regard is that I claim that we should not bring this dialogue together for one moment in time in which then, well, something will come out that will last for eternity. I think that during it needs to be an ongoing topic in the debate on European integration, and that's why I search for an institutional solution in the end. But reflecting on the first element of your question on the British approach, well, in a way, I think that is more in line with what I claim, namely that it is in essence a product of political debate, but also still that has the way it is brought and the way it is isolated in time and brought to the European arena. It's, don't get me wrong, it is a good starting point, of course, to get this discussion going on a European level, and in that way I also value the attempt of Van Haarsma Buma to get this discussion going in the Netherlands. But still, by doing this in this way, it still isolates the question in time, and that is my principal, well, the complaint or hesitation with all these initiatives. And of course, because on the other hand, if you ask me what kind of I also have ideas on what things Europe should or should not do. This is, I think everyone should, this is the essence of political debate. In my regard, agriculture, the way Europe deals with agriculture and the agricultural policy, that is that is in particular such a theme that was maybe once it functioned perfectly in time, and now it seems to me as outdated, and especially in a liberal perspective. So some hard claims can be made, but not in the way and in the isolated way it is done in many countries now.
Wouter Hulstein.
Thank you, Jiske, for your thought-provoking input. Just first question for clarification. Did I understand you correctly that you mean that the subsidiarity question should be about what is done by whom, more than what is done at which level?
Yes, but also the ways we can facilitate the discussion in what is done by whom. Also here, it is important for me to stress that that is not a question that you can answer isolated in time. So I don't say, well, we now say what is done where, and we should only discuss what is done by whom, but I want to facilitate or think about the institutional conditions that are needed to channel this discussion on that point, yes.
That's because, if you allow me, I would like to make to follow up on that, to make a comment, because I think subsidiarity is also always being involved to redistribute competences. But like subsidiarity, the origin of the word, of the concept, it's a Roman Catholic concept. So if you talk about multi-level governance, then you go to the Roman Catholic Church, there you see multi-level governance. But you also see a hierarchy, very much a hierarchy. So subsidiarity itself does not mean there is subsidiarity from that perspective means that there is set a common goal centrally, but locally you can choose your own way to implement that goal. But the goal where you want to go to, what kind of Europe do you want, is decided centrally. But in most of the discussions about subsidiarity, it is taken that there should be local decisions about the goals. But subsidiarity in itself does not allow for that. There should, perhaps then the issue would, the means would be proportionality, perhaps, but not subsidiarity, I believe. But if you would take...
Well, that's a rather theoretical approach, of course, of subsidiarity, and you mark the distinction with how it works in political debate, and that others have a different view on what it means. That's also a thing.
Yes, but if it does not live up to what people hope for it, then you could, perhaps it comes because of the essence of the concept. If the concept does not live up to what people expect from it, perhaps the concept does not work in the in the context. And I think that in Europe is the case. And if then subsidiarity could also be subsidiarity about what is done by whom, perhaps then the discussion could be changed to the focus on the Commission. I mean, the Commission itself sees itself, well, Barroso has several kind of said several points of view, points of time, as a technocratic way of decision making. He said literally, and I quote it if you allow me, that after the Second World War, the countries that founded the European community created supernatural institutions, and now we have the European Commission, the European Court of Justice, and the ECB. And why? Precisely to have independent assessment and monitoring, and also, if possible, independent enforcement mechanisms that are not subject to political maneuvering. Well, is that what Europe is for? That is not subject to political maneuvering? That could be, you could put that question to the fore. Well, I would like to do so. And that you say, well, first, a good start would not be not to see redistributing of competences between the member states and the EU, but competences between EU institutions. Perhaps the Commission should not be the only one of the to have a formal to be the only one to have formally the agenda setting of new legislation. In practice, the Council has a tool, but formally not only the Commission. Perhaps that should change there as well. Something that should be more politically. Perhaps Juncker will now do so, but perhaps there could also be changes there, in the whom, not only in the where.
Oh, and everything that can contribute to making a more political project of European integration and taking it out of the technocratic way that is dealt with, it would be, well, quite good news to me.
Yeah, from a liberal perspective, I think that would be a good news.
Yeah.
It was just a very minor point, Ton, about, you were talking about the link between the balance of competence review and the in-out referendum promised by David Cameron. Of course, the key thing is to remember that the competence review is a coalition government document agreed by the coalition, whereas David Cameron's in-out referendum promise is a Conservative Party promise. So there is a kind of a distinction to be drawn about what may or may not happen in the future, says a Sir Humphrey bureaucrat.
Yeah, I'm going to come to the defense of the Sir Humphrey bureaucrats, because I really don't think we should have a political commission. I know in the federalist mindset that many people, I mean, and that's a legitimate opinion to be in favor of a federal Europe and a political Europe, but I think the original idea, at least how it was understood, not so much in the actual treaties, but of the European cooperation, was to have some kind of a trade framework. And I think in that context, in a free trade EU, the job of the Commission is being a technical secretariat, pointing out to member states where they violate the treaty for being too protectionist. And I'm always a bit disturbed when I see people like Laszlo Andor going around Europe giving his opinion about all kinds of subjects, whereas his job is to work to open up borders, specifically then in the employment area. And I think it may even undermine the core job of the EU when they start becoming very political, because they need to, for example, decide on disputes whereby member states do not agree on opening up the postal market, for example. So I think it's quite important if you want to safeguard these free trade aspects, fair competition aspects of the EU treaty, that you have some kind of a neutral arbiter. And from the moment commissioners become politicians, then this aspect is in danger, I think.
Yeah, well, I think I don't know for sure if I understand you correctly, but is it also a plea for an EU that only deals with free trade issues? Because then I find myself as opposing, or in the other way of the discussion, that I think, well, in reality, we have moved beyond that. And if the outcome is that people are, well, in many ways influenced by European integration in different ways than only in a free trade way, I want to have an input on the, well, at the start, on this, at the beginning of the process of talking about these things. I want to give people influence as well. So I think we moved beyond that point. Europe is de facto how do you say it? A sui generis construct that leaves us with a political outcome, and therefore I want to have political input as well.
But just a small response. I mean, yeah, of course there are different options, and like I said, if you like a federal Europe, then it makes sense to have politicians there. I don't like that. I want the free trade area. But I think even if you have what we have, some hybrid form, I think to insert politicians will only make it worse. I think at the moment one of the problems is that what Europe has become has no acceptance on the ground, and basically France does not want its budget to be decided in Brussels by foreigners. It's not very complicated. That's how it is. And you can say, look, I mean, they have this power now, so why not make them more political, so at least there's a bit of a discussion about it, and that makes some sense. But I do think that it will only sort of lead to a bigger clash between the politicians in Brussels and the politicians in Paris, and the politicians in Paris will easily win hands down, and the politicians in every capital, because I think in every country, even in Belgium, the mainstream is not okay with having core aspects like the budget being decided by foreigners.
Your argument is that, well, the European Union has moved beyond this free trade area, but for example, one of the many examples, in the 18th century the reality was that America was ruled from London, and the political statement, which was successfully, was that the Americans at the end said, no, we don't want to be ruled by London, we want to rule ourselves. And if you plead, which I agree with, that there should be more political discussion, then it is relevant to have the citizens say what they want. And this can, otherwise it wouldn't be very useful. This could also mean that citizens say, well, we want to renationalize some areas from Brussels. Or do you exclude it?
No, I totally agree, and I realized that I realized it actually when I answered your question, that I made myself guilty to a thing that I always fight against, namely what I call a fait accompli argument, because it is so and so, it cannot be different. No, of course, when you want a political Europe, the question comes to the table, what should Europe do, or what should it look like? And I think that should be on that table. But it also gives me the position then that, as a liberal, to speak out and to give an image on what I think that Europe should stand for in order to, well, safeguard the liberal ambitions that I have. And for me, that doesn't stop with free trade. And I don't see how free trade can be isolated from, well, all kinds of juridical and legal fields as it has worked in practice. So.
One remark and one question. The remark first. Citizens can be dangerous, actually. Before the Treaty of Nice entered into force, after the Irish referendum that was negative, I participated at a conference, and there was one presentation about the necessity of involving citizens and participation, and then the second presentation came that was upheld by the fact that the Irish citizens said no to the Treaty of Nice. So if citizens actually vote or say what they have to say, it's not always in line with what we would think, or what political leaders would want to get out of it. But that was just. Well, maybe, yeah. Yes. But my question would be that you said that that this ongoing debate that should be done about EU competences that should go on constantly, it should be institutionalized. How would you imagine that?
Well, it relates to the point that Dirk-Jan Epping this morning came up with, to give national parliamentarians or representatives of national citizens a say, a direct say or a direct place in the debate about the future of Europe. And for me, the solution that appeals to me is in a second chamber or a senate or something like that. That's what I see for me.
I always thought that politicians were dangerous because they hold power, but I understand from you that since politicians are also citizens, they are even more dangerous than I thought. Yeah.
Some citizens are more dangerous than others.
Than others, exactly. Yeah. Which brings me to my question, which is about the entire debate on whether the EU is political or the committee is political or not. It depends completely on what you mean by political. If politics, if it's political in the sense of politics being about deciding together about what kind of society we want, how we want to arrange how we live together and with each other, then the question is, at what level do you want that kind of politics to occur? Where does that question need to be answered? And then you can have the debate on whether that has to be at the EU level or at the national level. If politics is about the exercise of power, there's no denying, no point in denying that the EU is already political, and that even a technical European Commission is political, because it has power and exercises power. And then as a liberal, I would say, just acknowledge that. Have it in the open, because it's the one thing that as liberals we know about people of power. Have it in the open, because then we can hold them into account. Then we know and control them. That would be. I said I was going to raise a question, but actually it was a comment. Sorry. Yeah. I'm not sorry for your opinion.
I agree. So I don't. Yeah.
Yeah, perhaps I may add up to it, and then make explicit that what seems to be technocratic choices, or what are made to be seen technocratic choices, what are made to be seen, are actually political choices. Because they are choices that for a certain society, for a certain type of way of living together, with whom not. Mm-hmm. All political choices, but being disguised in a kind of technocratic way. And well, so if Juncker gets his way, then he makes himself to big trouble. But well, hopefully then he will get his way.
My apologies for being distracted by a phone call and missing half of this interesting discussion, but I believe I just arrived at the right crucial moment to come in here. Unfortunately, Adriaan Schout isn't here from Klingendahl anymore. I've had an ongoing discussion for years with Adriaan about whether the Commission is political or not political, but only technical. I'm afraid to say there are two versions to reality as seen from two different points of view in terms of power. The Commission itself, the commissioners, the civil servants for decades know they are involved in a political institution, a political authority, and what we do is political. It's also led by 28 politicians, not 28 civil servants. However, in member states, maybe in certain member states, there is a perspective, there is an image that has been projected to society, to the press, to politicians, that somehow the Commission is a technical body, somehow sort of a technical secretariat of highly skilled experts that do nice things, but that government, that the politicians are the ones sitting in the Council of Ministers. Now, my experience is, yes, Council of Ministers is political, yes, European Parliament is political, and yes, European Commission is political, a little bit like different branches of government. And the Commission, already for many years, not the new incoming president, but already the old outgoing one, has said that the Commission is the executive of the EU. In Dutch, and again, the attempt to project a different type of perspective, the semantics used to describe the Commission in the Dutch language is, it's the dagelijks bestuur, which doesn't really mean government, which tries to imply something less than government. And I always then ask a question in reverse: who is the dagelijks bestuur of the Netherlands? And I only have one answer to that: it's the cabinet, it's the government. So I think the question, is it political, is it technical, is a very valid one, but clearly one influenced in this country, and maybe others, by an attempt to portray a different kind of image compared to what really happens in Brussels.
Yeah, I think I triggered it a little bit also, but I think I want to, of course, distinguish between what is actually happening in reality, that you have very powerful people in Brussels with a lot of discretion, if that can serve as a means of distinguishing bureaucracy or a bureaucrat from a politician. So indeed, I do think primarily it should be more of a technocracy. It should be more of a institution composed of people implementing decisions than it is at the case. I think it's absolutely true that the people in Brussels have a lot of discretion in that sense. They are a lot of these people have political power, but I meant to say that I disagree with the idea that they should get even more discretion in what they decide. For me, that is not the ideal.
Question. You argued several times in your speech against setting in stone the competences of the different levels. But at the same time, you noted that in the 19th century, liberals made up constitutions in order to limit the power of governments. This was not done for eternity, because you can change the constitution. So what would a discussion on who rules, or what level do you rule, what would it mean if it would not translate into, not eternal, but for some time, a describement of these competences? What would be the use of it?
Well, this is always, I think, where two lines are when we start talking about constitutions and this carved in stone division of competences list. I think we should distinguish between the two, because they are not necessarily the same. As we wrote our constitution, the Dutch constitution, it is very clear on, well, the powers, or the basic powers and competences of rule, but maybe it's better to illustrate it by with an example. We haven't said in our constitution that the national government for always and always forever, at every point in history, needs to be the protector or the main organizer of how we organize healthcare in the Netherlands, for instance. That's one of the reasons that we can decentralize these tasks now for a large part to our local level. And I think we can come up with some sort of constitutional order in the European Union without stating for eternity or pretending to state for eternity if or whether Europe should deal with, well, should never again deal with agriculture, matters of agriculture, or should always deal with defense, because I think that on this policy level, and it becomes even worse when you take it to the level of certain directives and regulations, they cannot be there without any historical horizon. That changes over time, while the core of whether we need a commission and wherefore it is needed, or whether we need a parliament and wherefore it is needed, is more or less a separate question in my view. So we need to discuss them separately.
Of course, nothing human-made is forever, but if you take federal systems as an example, there you see such a delineation. Germany, Switzerland, Belgium, Canada, all kinds of countries where exactly is said at what kind of level should what be done. I mean, the German Länder, they have their own university system, their own school systems. They can do it the way they like it. They even have their own national Länder security.
I do not say that this sort of thing, especially when we move through a European federation, cannot evolve over time, and we can, through this political discussion and the institutionalization of that, something like that can develop. But to put it at this point in time, all these kind of things in the European constitution would be too early, doing not doing the right things at the right time.
No, it came up during the European Convention. Exactly this.
Well, we have seen how it ended, how this thing ended.
Yeah, it was rejected by the member states, some member states, because they feared that it would end up in they having less power than getting more power. But it was tabled at that time. I think there's any time ripe for such a...
The European Union should prove first also that it can, well, live up to certain tasks that it has, and that at this point in time it has a problem of thrust in that regard. So you cannot solve these things at this point in time. And I also agree with what Dirk-Jan Epping has said this morning about it, that there's no quick fix in this. These things need to evolve over time.
No, but presently we can expect everything from the European Union, because there is no way it's at the European Union. Well, the treaties and a part of the history of the treaties can be interpreted in such a way that with every problem we have, we can turn to the European Union. But if you would write down that for these problems you do not turn to the European Union, you know you should not turn to the European Union. But now we can always turn to the European Union for a problem that should be solved locally, nationally, with other states around. There's always the European Union to turn to. Perhaps we should write down, for that problem you don't go to the European Union. You're not allowed to bother them with your local problem. It's your problem, it's your government problem, it's your whatever problem, it's not a European problem. Now you can always go to Europe, and there's always someone welcoming you, of course.
Oh, and that's, I think, the core pain of the painful thing in this discussion is how do you come out of this deadlock of choosing between more or less competences first, or a better democratic structure first. And that's the interesting, of course, the interesting element. In reality, as these things evolve at the same time, then we cannot choose between them, and that's a difficult point. But I think the only way we can at least help European legitimacy on its way is by letting it taking place in a political debate as much as possible, and that's what my core point remains on this point.
Andy?
Just to help all of us understand the concept, the European Union cannot be approached on any issue or any competence or any field. And there's certainly not some sort of genetic preposition that the Union will want to get involved in any matter whatsoever. And maybe just for everyone's enlightenment, the March 2010 consolidated treaties of the European Union not the Lisbon Treaty. The Lisbon Treaty is an amending treaty of the treaties themselves, but those amendments are then translated into the real treaties. This March 2010 amending consolidated treaties, pages 50 to 53. It has all the competences of the European Union, those competences that are exclusive to the Union, that are shared with member states, that are maybe only coordinating or informative towards member states, and things that are not even mentioned there do not belong to the Union. So that was the result of the whole decade of the Lisbon Treaty, etc., the Constitutional Convention. But it does mean that there are certain things you can't approach the Union on. You might want to, politically, and then politically, well, everything can happen in politics, of course. But that's not so much because the Union has the competence, but because the members want the Union to have the competence.
Unless there is a burning question, I will thank Yiske and give the floor to Charlotte for some concluding remarks.
Yeah, so will be my challenge for the day to end with some sort of coherent last remarks. Well, first of all, we came in this room this morning to discuss the EU Competences Review. Is there a way to find, from a liberal perspective, an ideal balance of competences between member states and European Union? And we wanted to approach that from both an academic perspective and a more practical inside perspective. My remarks and also my job will be in the book, in the as an editor of the book, to find the red line as a liberal, which will be difficult. But I can, for now, say that of course we cannot formulate just one fixed answer to what is the ideal balance of competence, and I think I had the expectation of finding one. I am pleased that we are not today, we haven't sticked to that just one question of which competences are EU and which are national. We went much deeper than that. The first three speakers today focused on really the manner of governance, the way of governance. Casper held an introduction about multi-level governance, about the vices and virtues of it. He stressed the importance of centralization for setting common goals, and he talked about the importance of a balance of competence in the regard of the place of where decisions are made. Peter Kleppel, of course, stressed the importance to look at the impact of regulations that are made at an EU level. And Dirk-Jan Epping went deeper into what kind of treaty changes are needed. And these are the three speakers, they all, well, yeah, I think the common thread to see so is that they all focused on the importance for liberals on a competition, on a political system that promotes individual freedom and democracy, and to adhere to a sense of legitimacy among citizens, to have citizen consent. So competition, both in regards of internal trade, the trade market in the EU, but also competition in the sense of regulatory competition, which is especially what Peter Klepper and Casper also stressed when they talked about the problems of harmonization and the problems of multi-level governance. or actually the virtue of multi-level governance. And then the last two speakers, they are, when I look at this from now, when I look back, I think that it would have been better to start with you and then have the three speakers after you, because you were the ones who took a step back, who told us that before we can even come up with an idea of what is the ideal balance of competence, we first have to look at what the EU is all about for us. Why are we together? Why are we together, and what kind of polity do we want? And how then is the second step? How will we achieve that? And I think both of you touched on a very, for me also a very sensitive or a problematic topic, which is that liberals themselves do not agree, I think, at the moment about what the EU is about. And so that is in fact the underlying question, I think. And also when we look at the next ALDE Congress this month or next month, this will be, I think, a central question. What I think liberals have kind of, they are lost. They don't know, they don't agree among themselves about what the EU is. That said, I think I don't want to be as pessimistic as I may sound now, because I do think that we have, like I said, I could identify three core aspects of liberal thought in the debate today: competition, promotion of individual freedom and democracy, and the importance to include citizens in, I don't know, in policy making, of course, but in one way or another, either by a referendum or by institutional changes to secure national parliaments in European policy making. So yeah, and then Yiskje kind of made the circle round at the end by concluding that that just because we have to take a step back, just because we have to think first what we as liberals want from the EU, or what kind of polity we want, the importance is not so much as to what it has to be regulated at EU level, but rather how. And with that question, we actually are back at the beginning of this morning. Yeah, I think, I don't know if you have to add something to that.
No, it's very tempting to end for me with the question of Christina, why are we together, and to make a round, but that would maybe take too much time. Maybe this is one of the questions that each of the authors in the book can enter upon this question. Why are we together in the European Union as liberals?